Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. It is Thursday, the 13th of November, 1:47 p.m. I want to thank all of you for your messages. It is really so enriching and meaningful to hear from you. And I mean that. This is still a very small podcast, and it's very intimate. Anybody who wants to talk to me can talk to me. And I find the reciprocation of energy to be very heartwarming, very moving, and I want to let you know that, so thank you. Today I want to talk about what it means to be a human being and what the future is going to look like, and how human beings are going to change, and what we're going to become, and what the effect of that becoming is going to be. Some of the things that I say today may seem unrealistic to you, given the present circumstance, and given the obstacles that are appearing daily, weekly, monthly, annually, and given what appears to be the fulfillment of a dark agenda of technocratic control on the planet, offering more and more and more comfort to human beings. And you know how I feel about that. I spoke about it a couple podcasts ago. There's nothing wrong with being comfortable. I don't advocate asceticism. I don't advocate wearing deliberately uncomfortable or itchy clothes like a Middle Ages monk. I don't advocate self-flagellation, whipping yourself. I don't advocate any form of punitive chastisement of yourselves. I don't advocate any type of forced asceticism. All of these religious conventions, many of them coming out of the Christian world, but not exclusively Christian, are the product of pretenders. People pretending to submit to we'll leave that as a variable. I don't want to say God. Doesn't seem to fit. It usually goes with the God culture. Almost always, but doesn't seem to fit somehow. I think the principle behind asceticism is correct, but the remedy by religious institutions and religious thinking is ridiculous. the highest level of pain you can experience in life is simply living a normal life with your heart open. That will produce more pain in your life than any self-flagellation, any self-chastisement, any long periods of fasting, any of these things. To live honestly, openly, and sincerely. And to live in defiance of the comfort. Now it's interesting that the people we celebrate the most and the stories that we listen to the most, at least in the last 75 years or so, are almost always about the people who risked everything and forsook their comfort to pursue a personal ambition. The world of popular culture is replete with stories like this. They are endless. Madonna, Maria Ciccone, I think is her real name. If I'm getting the Italian surname wrong, I apologize. I'm not trying to be culturally insensitive. I believe it's Maria Ciccone, Madonna. You know, there's stories of her eating out of garbage cans in the early 80s. You know, doing anything she had to do to get ahead in the music business. And we look at that and we say, wow, she went for it. You know, but when you think about it, it's really kind of a stupid story. It's very stupid, actually. They're all stupid. You know, the story of Sylvester Stallone risking everything to hold on to his Rocky screenplay because the studios wanted to buy it, but they didn't want him to play Rocky. And he was so broke he had to sell his dog, which he loved. You hear these stories all the time, you know, people making these sacrifices to make their dreams come true, but they're not really dreams, and nothing is really coming true. And I don't think that these lives are very good at all, and I don't think the end result is very good at all. And these people end up ensconced in a satanic system. And make no mistake about it, the entertainment industry is a satanic system. Now, when I say satanic, I'm not necessarily bleeding into all of the Abrahamic rhetoric. Anybody who's read The Devil in Us knows my feelings on the devil. When I say satanic system, I mean the system of degradation and control that is on top of human beings now. The phony enlightenment, all the bullshit. Our heroes, you know, the Protestants and the Jews, liberating us from the theocratic tyranny of the Vatican to replace it 400 years later with the theocratic global dominance of the Noahide religion centered in Jerusalem and the Temple of Solomon, and the return of blood sacrifice, which has not been a part of Western culture for millennia, at least out in the open. Wars aside. Sometimes All you need to see the world the way I see it is the right context. You know? All of these liberals out there, you know? 90% of liberalism is the defense of sexual activity outside of marriage. Sounds absurd when I just say it that simply, but study it yourself. 90% of what we call liberalism is really the defense of the right to have purposeless sex, self-gratification sex. The example that comes to mind is Bill Maher of Real Time with Bill Maher. Lifetime bachelor, practically had his own room at the Playboy Mansion in the 90s. Probably a sex addict. And like all of these Hollywood types, favors women 20, 30, 40 years younger than him. And so what you see is an energetic structure in the human being tied to self-gratifying sex, which is a clear indication of somebody incapable of love. Right? I mean, I'm not saying anything radical here, am I? It's pretty self-evident, don't you think? And a life without love is a living hell. But when you commit yourself to this life, this satanic life, the promise is that you're never going to have to feel the absence of love, because there will be non-stop sensory and sensual distraction for you. Beautiful homes, beautiful cars, beautiful women, or beautiful men if you're a woman. Madonna's another example. Her present boyfriend is like 30, 40 years younger than her. He's like 30 years old, I think. She's like close to 70. You know, Madonna used to go around in limos. And she used to go through the Latino section of New York. And she used to pick up boys and have sex with them. I don't know what those boys were doing at the side of the street. Maybe they were gay prostitutes. A lot of gay prostitutes aren't gay. They just do it for money. Little known street fact from your street reporter Bruce McDonald, who himself grew up on the streets. Sometimes all you need is the right context, and then everything just becomes completely understandable. And 90% of what we call liberalism is the defense of sexual indulgence. Now, with that said, I am an absolute proponent of and an absolute defender of free will self-expression. I would not want to live in a society where people could not express themselves as they want to express themselves, including their sexual self-expression. If someone is more comfortable having a series of meaningless sexual encounters based on physical attraction, which change or alternate with the cycle of wearing out a pair of shoes, or faster, with the cycle of a season, like spring, summer, fall, or winter, 3 months. It's their prerogative to do that. Nothing wrong with it. according to the law of God, according to the law of free will. Now, the world is going to become more and more divided between those human beings who allow themselves to be seduced by comfort, seduced by a life of indulgence and little work, seduced by a life of external stimulation rather than internal exploration. External stimulation rather than internal exploration. That's good phrasing, if I do say so myself, if I can be so immodest to take a moment and say, I like that. And as you go through this system, you should be more and more aware of the dichotomy. Good word, dichotomy. Let's look it up. Dichotomy definition. Great word. Been using it forever. A division or contrast between two things that are or are represented as being opposed or entirely different. So the dichotomy of the human condition is becoming more and more apparent. I imagine it would have been harder to see 500 years ago. I imagine it would have been harder to see even 150 years ago. But you can't miss it now. Sometimes it's just the simple articulation of something that people connect with in the Talamanca Review. The simple articulation of something. Like what I just articulated, the dichotomy of our time, which is external stimulation versus internal exploration. I promised you at the beginning of this podcast that I would give you a picture of the future humanity. I'll try to do that. You know, as I go about my life, and as I have my conversations with people, and as I look at my own life, and as I look at the lives of people I love and respect, certain spiritual teachers, certain artists and writers, all of these things, I notice now that nobody got it right. That there is no system, philosophy, or teaching of living and life that is correct. That they're all imbalanced now. All of them. The imbalance in the East is the sequestering of the spiritual people into monastic life and separating them and their voices and their productivity from the society proper, with some notable exceptions like Thich Nhat, the Vietnamese Buddhist master, who became an outspoken peace advocate during the Vietnam War. Just died a few years ago. Remarkable human being, mastered compassion, centeredness, and balance. But he's an exception. You see, in the Eastern systems, they go away. They separate themselves from society. It's very interesting to just see it in its proper context. That in the East, they believe that the spiritual life is separate from the life of society. But it isn't, because all of the Buddhist monks make their living begging from the people who work. And in a sense, they're selling blessings. It's the same thing in India, again, with exceptions. I think Sadhguru is an exception. I don't think he's a very good spiritual teacher. I don't think he knows much about spirituality at all, actually. I think he's a master of the human systems. The respiratory system, the autonomous nervous system, the lymphoid system, the electrical system in the body, the circulatory system, the brainwave system. I would go so far as to say yoga knows more about the human being than any other science on the planet. We just don't openly acknowledge it because it doesn't conform to the Western model of what science is. And that's mainly because you can't prove it to somebody who doesn't want to prove it to themselves. And so from the Western perspective, that's the fertile ground for a self-fulfilling thesis. A self-fulfilling prophecy. But everything that they're saying is true. I can say that. I've proved it to myself. Everything that they're saying is true. But what I respect about Sadhguru and his Isha Foundation is he's trying to get harmonization teachings into the world. He's trying to get people to divide their attention between being productive citizens of a society and productive inner explorers to create a kind of new human being. A human being that can live in the world, but also come to understand the inner world, the world of awakened imagination, the world of dimensions, the world of spirits, the world of cause and effect, the world of health, the world of true meaning and true purpose. And in that regard, I respect them. I've said this before on my podcast. Now, one of the ways that you can recognize a spiritually bankrupt person is the amount of attention or energy they need from other people to validate themselves. So let's go back to Madonna and Sylvester Stallone. And it's just a coincidence that both of my examples are Italian Americans. I'm not trying to say anything by that. It's just those are the ones that come to mind because their formation stories were put into me when I was before the age of consent, before I was 18. I remember being terrified of Madonna. She seemed like a grand spectral witch to me. You know? I remember when I went to university, about 75% of the student body in my program was female because it was a journalism program, and apparently women have more developed language centers than men. So if you're going to be a broadcaster or a writer or anything like that, you're going to do it with that skill set, the ability to speak and the ability to articulate and the ability to use language. And Madonna was like a hero to these women. They loved her. I mean, why wouldn't they? I mean, you're dealing with 19, 20-year-old girls. I was a little bit older. I went back to university as a mature student. I was about 22, so I was a few years older than them. And they all loved Madonna. And Madonna was like their hero. And these were intelligent women. And I remember thinking to myself, what is it that Madonna represents? One of my female friends, she went on to be a successful novelist in Canada. I won't say her name on my podcast. Although if you're not into literature, you would not know who she is. She said that she admired Madonna because Madonna could, and I quote, talk down a rapist. Meaning that just by the power of her personality, she could strip a man of an erection, which would be the instrument of rape. You can't rape a woman unless you have an erection. You could, I suppose, well, you could do it the way the Israeli soldiers raped the Palestinian prisoners, to explain it without actually explaining it, if for those of you who follow the news. But why would a real rapist who has the impulse to release his own, to discharge his own sexual energy, why would a rapist do that? So in a sense, she was right. You know, Madonna could talk down a rapist. And it turns out that Madonna thinks a lot like a rapist. You know, which I guess like knows like. You look at these examples I've given, you know, like Sylvester Stallone and Madonna, and you look how their lives turned out. Yeah, there's material prosperity there, but there's also a tremendous spiritual vacuity and a spiritual debt. And you have to wonder whether they made the right decision. You know, so again, It's not sacrificing comfort to discover a deeper meaning in life, like the person who goes on spiritual quest. It's about making short-term sacrifices so that your comfort and status level is amplified. So you're not just this level of employee or manager at the post office, and this is the kind of car you can buy based on your salary. This is the kind of house you can own in Brooklyn or Queens or Toronto. Which is how unimaginative people who make no sacrifice for their inner lives think. And we get tricked into believing that people like Madonna and Sylvester Stallone are big dreamers, and what they've achieved in life is somehow spiritual because they sacrificed. Again, Sylvester Stallone selling his dog, living in a room riddled with bed bugs. Madonna eating out of garbage dumpsters in the early and mid 80s. Very colorful stories. But when you look at the outcome of their lives, their petition and their obeisance was not to God. It was to the entity that grants status and favors in this world. And the world is so corrupt now that we look at stories like that, and those are, some parents will actually use those people as examples for their children. This is what he did to achieve. This is what she did to achieve it. And they do that like it's something, like it means something. Now I'm going to tell you something that's true. All of these people who are addicted to our attention, no matter who they are, okay? Doesn't matter whether they're Madonna or Sylvester Stallone or Donald Trump or Benjamin Netanyahu, or let's be honest, the Jewish need for public recognition. Look at me, Ma. I made it. I'm a somebody. But that whole mentality leads to you being nobody. It's almost a form of spiritual suicide. Spiritual suicide. And what can you say about a society that puts people like that up on a pedestal? What do you say about people like that? Why do they need our attention so much? Why do they need it? Well, the simple answer is because they have no other access to energy. And so, in a sense, they become conduits or gathering points for energy. I think the man and woman of the future is going to be spiritually balanced and committed to the time and place they're living. That the two aren't going to be separated like the hemispheres of the brain, like the East and the West in the world now. That it's all going to come together. And we're going to get really aware, really productive, really powerful people who can actually inject energy into societies who are not sucking energy out. Which is what all of our leaders are doing now. And there's all this information out there. When you first take it in, you go, oh yeah, I see that, yeah. But not many people go on to really think about it or contemplate it or ask for spiritual insight. And they just accept what they're told. One of the biggest nonsense stories out there now was begun by Robert C. Monroe of the Monroe Institute. Very famous astral traveler. I don't recommend astral travel, by the way. You never go into the astral plane unless you're taken there in a dream and there's a very specific mission for it. The astral world is extremely volatile. But he was a prolific astral traveler. Okay? And astral travel is not necessarily like you're doing it in the astral body per se. Because if you're doing it in the astral body, you're always going to have that cord to your solar plexus. But the remote viewers and people like that, they're able to travel on the astral, but probably with a higher aspect of consciousness, more like their mental body. Because there's no cord. You can't go and visit Mars like Ingo Swann did and have this cord stretched out from Earth to Mars. Doesn't work that way. But Monroe gave us all this idea of loosh, that there's all these entities harvesting our loosh. And I ask you, is it true? I'm not saying we're not being energy robbed, but is it invisible entities? Is it archonic, demonic, reptilian forces? I don't know. But when I look at the world, it seems to be other human beings. Like Madonna, like Sylvester Stallone, like Donald Trump. A man or a woman who truly has access to eternal energy in their eternal selves will very often turn away from public because there's nothing there for them. They don't need the energy, and the energy coming from the human collective just pollutes or imbalances the state of consciousness in which they want to live. And I think you've got to ask yourself serious questions about people who want the love of a bunch of strangers, who want to be famous. You know? What is it they're missing? What would their lives be like if they never got that energy from the attention of their fans, their people? Now, don't confuse with what I'm saying with people who genuinely have something to contribute. And it's definitely a part of who they are in an incarnation, like Nikola Tesla. But Tesla never sought the energy of other people. He tried to change the world for the better without any attention for himself or taking energy from other people for himself. And yet Edison makes the history books. Right? We're starting to correct that now, but I don't know. I don't know. So if you've been listening closely to what I've been trying to articulate today, you will come to the conclusion that it's my belief that the most perilous things to our own energetic integrity are not invisible demons or archons or reptilians or anything like that. Because I don't think they're allowed to directly take energy from the third dimension. They need to do it through a proxy. They need to do it by seducing somebody. So everybody who becomes one of these energetic portals, taking in all of this human attention and energy, and the highest form of that is the energy of adoration. Many people I know of, you probably wouldn't know them, but many people I know of in the world of serious black magic openly state that the most powerful witch on the planet right now is Taylor Swift. Now, you don't necessarily think that when you see Taylor Swift or you listen to her music, do you? When we think of a witch, we think of the picture that Disney gives us, don't we? It's the old hag with the dirty hair and the filthy skin and the sagging breasts and the toothless smile and the cackle and the decrepit eyes and the bag lady wardrobe. That's the witch. But it's actually an inversion. Tinkerbell is actually the witch. Taylor Swift is actually the witch. It's another part of the grand inversion that's going on down here. And people just throw their energy at these people. So I would say that they're demonically aligned. And demonically aligned would mean that they're working cooperatively with energy vampires on the fourth dimension. And again, going back to one of the key things I've taught you folks on the Talamanca Review, these entities aren't allowed to operate directly upon us. You see, we live in a system of checks and balances. But they are allowed to tempt human beings and to get the human beings to go out and get the energy themselves. And then that human being will get favored by the collective of entities that are using the energy on the other side. And the material existence of that person will be taken care of. That's part of the contract. Yeah, I don't want to be dramatic here, but I don't think there's really anybody in the public space that is not part of this demonic construct. Anybody that we would all know in common. And this would definitely, I think, even include the public intellectuals, like your Noam Chomskys and stuff like that, definitely demonically influenced. And I say that because he never talks about anything meaningful that could bring about real change. Noam Chomsky is a disclosure agent. So he bleeds off that pressure that builds up in the collective unconscious that would produce change. So Chomsky is the guy who provides the false catharsis by opening up the valves of public consciousness to let the steam out so the pipes don't burst. When in actuality, the best thing that could happen is the pipes actually burst, because then people would see we have a problem. Everybody wants to blame everything on something else. And I'm not saying that those things aren't there. They're there. But they don't work and they don't function without us. We have to give them our consent to operate through us. We have to be the agents in this dimension to take the energy and turn it over to them. And you'll know when you're around these people, if you're halfway sensitive at all, you'll feel it. You'll feel it. I mean, these people have vile vibrations. Vile. You know? All of them. They're organic portals is what they are. An organic portal is a door between this world and another world. And the world is full of them now. And one of the reasons that the world has become so imbalanced is the spiritual people turn away from the world. And the religious people, which I didn't finish from the beginning of the podcast, but in the Western model, if you're a religious person, it's all about following the Jewish model of making the world a better place. Change the world, transform the world. God wants you to make the world a better place. God has no such desire whatsoever. God exists out of time and space. Why would God be interested in a progressive metric of improvement or growth, or what we call evolution, in a sentient bipedal hominid created by this creative force we call God? Why would he give a shit? So the Western theology is completely full of shit. They're just using that as a cover story to what? To gain control. And once they have the control, they get the energy. The name of the game down here is capturing the human energy. Capture the human energy. And the people most susceptible to it are Westerners. And the people most susceptible to it are First Worlders. Or I should say, when I look at a place like I live now, I don't think they've ever really been tempted, so I can't really compare them to First World Westerners. Were they to be tempted, would they pass or would they fail that temptation? I don't know. Very interesting question. Now, the man and woman of the future is going to bring the two things together. So corrupt politicians are going to have to be dealing with the force of consciousness of an evolved contemplative who hasn't gone into monastic life, but who has stayed in the world and has the courage to look the person in the eyes and say, "You're lying. You are lying." You know, one of the reasons the Western system has succeeded so well is anybody intelligent enough to question it is also intelligent enough to profit from it. It's a fundamentally unfair system in which people who... It's almost like intellectual bullying. And maybe that's just an evolution in our society, because for the vast majority of human history, we've been bullied by physically superior people, warriors, people unafraid to kill or seriously maim other human beings, They've been the bullies of the past, but the bullies of the present are intellectual. You don't know what I know? You don't think as well as I do? Well, you're not going to be able to make $10 million on Wall Street, are you? I can make that kind of money without working. And none of our law has corrected itself. The law should represent the damage done to society. So if an individual like Sam Bankman-Fried, the crypto guy, absconds with several $1 billion from his scam, the proportion of that crime, the amount of money involved, should represent his sentence. So if you're going to put someone in jail for 10 years for robbing 3 banks and getting away with $40,000, then Sam Bankman-Fried should be incarcerated for the rest of his natural life and have all of his asset. The penalty should be much higher, but it isn't. Oh, it's a non-violent crime. What about all the people who commit suicide because he robbed their money? How can you say it's a non-violent crime? It isn't a non-violent crime. So this is where I think we're going. We're going to a world where it's going to be much harder for people to get away with this stuff. It's already starting. It's already begun. Which is why they're shoring everything up. Which is why they're consolidating everything with this technological prison. But it's not going to work. Okay, it's not going to work. There's they're already suggesting that there are a number of groups on the planet, public and private. Public would be governmental in nature, who've already cracked blockchain. It's not as secure as people say it is. A very intelligent, popular. Sooner or later, it's all going to get cracked. Nothing is permanent, right? So they can bring in the digital ID and all this stuff, but all that's going to do is motivate the human race to crack it, to break. What do people do? They break out of prisons. That's what we've been doing. They break out of slavery. We've been going through this cycle since the beginning of time. It's never going to end, and the negative side is never going to be able to come up with a system so thorough and so complete that we are eternally trapped, or trapped for a significant period of time, like 1,000 years or so, which would be about 30 generations, right? If a generation is 33 years. It's not going to happen. The battle, the way this place has been set up, it's always like catch and release fishing. A slave system will last for 100, 200, 300, 400 years, but sooner or later it collapses. It has to collapse because of the way human consciousness works, because human energy and human consciousness is the main driving force in this dimension. And this dimension, this physical world we live in, this realm, whatever you want to call it, tortoise-shaped, in my estimation, not round or flat, but tortoise-shaped. This realm is just completely full of God's love and energy. And not every dimension is. God is, I think, easiest to access in the 3rd, the 6th, and the 9th dimensions, and the 12th, which would be cycling out of this reality completely and going to a state of existence and being in which all of this stuff gets left behind. I don't know if you go to a new universe or you create your own universe at that point, but you can't stay here. But it moves in this cycle of 3s. And so the stuff in the 4th dimension is kind of subsisting on rations, if you will. Right? Whatever energy they take with them over there is all the energy they have to stay there. And when that energy is depleted, they have to come back and recharge through another incarnation, a re-embodiment down here. Very interesting the way the whole thing works. It's a very delicate balance, this whole thing. And that's the title of today's podcast, A Very Delicate Balance. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.